Measurement of bilinguality. Now, an important aspect of research done in bilingualism is the measurement of bilinguality. Now, if we would know the difference between bilinguality and bilingualism, with the former, that is bilinguality related to individuals and bilingualism related to societies, keeping that difference in mind, more work has been done in terms of measuring bilinguality than bilingualism in societies. The reason might be because it is much easier to study individuals than large sections of society. So we will over here in this module focus on the measurement of bilinguality. Now, if we are to measure bilinguality and we want to use a scientific method, we need to conceptualize what we mean by bilinguality, and we need to see how do the different definitions of bilingualism or bilinguality that we want to work with, we need to come up with a kind of a construct that we would like to operationalize. When we operationalize a construct after conceptualizing it, that means we develop certain indicators, and we say that these indicators are, if we find them, would define the presence or absence of bilinguality or the extent of bilinguality that we want to study. For instance, you might say if someone knows certain vocabulary, certain extent of vocabulary or grammar or structures, you would say that this is an indicator of somebody knowing a language. Similarly, when we have established the indicators, we would need to move on to measuring them. Measurement, more often than not, requires a quantification. That is, we need to see the extent. It might be qualitative, but it can also be qualitative. Now, over here, it is important to remind you that bilinguality, more often than not, has been studied in experimental contexts. Now, measures of bilinguality. What are the different measurements that have been used? One way to measure bilinguality has been what we call comparative measures, and this has been the most common technique that has been used to measure bilinguality. What we do in this is that we sort of try to come up with certain features, like we talked about certain items or linguistic items within each language that the person knows, and then we try to compare those items with each other and to sort of see the competence, how much competent that person is comparatively in the two languages. So what we are trying to do is actually trying to measure competence in two languages in relation to each other. Now, this comparative measurement is problematic for two reasons. First, what might be more important in one language, for instance, the use of article, might not be so important in the use of another language, for instance, Pashto. Or for instance, you see there is a lot of gender in certain language. In other languages, gender is more subordinate to other linguistic features which are more important. Secondly, when we are saying competence and we are trying to sort of like establish a native like idea, so what is how and do we define this competence? For instance, take the example of English. pick up this Oxford University sort of dictionary, and it would say English is a language spoken by the English people. But then what is the language that is spoken by Americans? What is the language spoken by the Australians? So in any case, there are some methodological problems, but they can be overcome by narrowly defining what we want to find. And it is also more relevant to additive or subtractive bilingualism. That is, whether one language is being learned at the expense of the other language, additive bilingualism, or if one language is being added to the repertoire of the first language, and over here we could say additive bilingualism, and I'm sorry, the first one would be that we talked about would be subtractive bilingualism. Measures of bilingual competence. Another way is to compare competence in languages in relation to other monolingual linguists in either of those languages. So English compared to the native speakers of English, and Urdu compared to the Urdu speakers. We again have this problem. We try to study the behavior and the comfort level in that kind of measurement. Then again, people also study, or researchers also study, the difference between compound and coordinative bilinguality. How much is the conceptualization of meaning the same as in the language that has been learned, that is being learned the second time, or how much there are semantic differences between the terms or the languages that are being used. We discussed compound and coordinative bilinguality earlier also. And then a way to measure bilinguality is through language biographies, self-reports. It's more subjective. So bilinguals themselves talk about their comfort level with the languages, when did they learn the language, the context that they learned in, and their judgments of bilingual production. Judgments would mean their attitudes towards different languages that they know. Then there is also what is also measured is bilingual specificity. What do we mean by bilingual specificity? We mean that a bilingual is more than a sum of two monolinguals. So bilingual people or bilinguals actually work differently or think differently from monolinguals, and you try to specify what are the different ways in which that happens. Then what is measured is cognitive correlates of bilinguality. What is the impact of bilinguality on the cognitive development of children, and how does the cognitive development of a child affects his or her bilinguality? And finally, but not the least, are the affective correlates of bilinguality. What are the emotional effects of bilinguality? These are also measured.